Hi everyone, this is Stella and welcome to Stella Music Theory. Today we are going to go over some exercises from Chapter 2 in the Grade 1 Discovering Music Theory Workbook. Let's get started. Chapter 1 is on pitch. In this chapter you will learn about leisure lines and rewriting notes in the treble and bass clefs. Leisure lines. At Grade 1, we discovered that middle C is placed on its own line, called a leisure line. Positioned below the staff in the treble clef and above the staff in the bass clef. You can think of leisure lines as little extensions of the staff lines. At Grade 2, you will meet notes that use one or two leisure lines above or below the staff. So leisure lines are short little lines that we put below the staff or above the staff. Let's take a look at the box here. Look at these notes in the treble clef. C is on the leisure line and B is below it. Here we have a treble clef. Treble clef is used to show notes that are higher than middle C, and therefore middle C is written on a leisure line here below the staff. So when the note is on the leisure line, it will be middle C, and when the note is below that leisure line, it will be the note below C, which would be B in music. If you want to write A and G below middle C, you simply add a second leisure line like this. So one line, when the note is on the line, it will be C. When the note is below the line, it will be B. A is one note lower than B, so we can add one more line and put the note on the lower line. That would be A. And G would be a note lower than A, so it would be a note under the lower leisure line. This will be G. Here are the notes that use leisure lines at Grade 2. We have a treble clef here. This is where middle C is, which is on the line below the staff. And this is the B below middle C, which is a note below the leisure line. Then when we have two leisure lines, with that note sitting on the lower leisure line, it will be the A below middle C. And when there are two leisure lines and the note sits below the lower leisure line, it will be the note G below middle C. We can also add a leisure line above the staff, like this, and it will be A. So if we put a line above the staff, when the note sits on that line, it will be the A. And when the note sits above the line, it will be the B above the A. And when we have two leisure lines, with the note sitting on the top line, it will be C. And when the note sits above the second leisure line, it will be D. You can remember this note, which is one line below the staff. So this is middle C. I'm going to put a star here. And we can also remember this one, which is one leisure line above the staff. This would be A. So you can remember these two notes as your reference point. And you can count up or down accordingly to find the other notes on the leisure lines. Next, we are going to look at the notes in the bass clef. So this is the bass clef. And this time, middle C will sit here, which is on the leisure line above the staff. So this is middle C. And when we put the note above the leisure line, it will be the D above middle C. When there are two leisure lines, the note sits on the top line, it will be E above middle C. And if the note sits above the second leisure line, it will be F above middle C. Again, we can add a ledger line below the staff, and that would be this note here. When the note sits on that ledger line, it will be E, a low E. And if we keep going down, we put the note below that ledger line, it will be the note below E, which will be D. And if we add one more ledger line, with that note sitting on the lower ledger line, it will be C. And if the note sits below the second ledger line, it will be a B. So again, we can remember middle C here as our reference point, and also the low E here, which is on the ledger line below the staff. So if you remember just these two notes, you can figure out the rest of the notes that are on the ledger line. Let's take a look at exercise 1 together. Write the name of each note in the boxes. Remember to check the clefs carefully. Question A is done as an example. Here we have a treble clef, and this note sits on a ledger line above the staff. This is actually our reference point, which is A. Question B, bass clef. Here we have a note that sits on a ledger line below the staff in the bass clef. And again, this is also our reference point, which is E. Question C, treble clef. Here we have a note that sits below a ledger line under the staff. If we remember this note here that is on the ledger line is C, then this note that we are working on, which is below the ledger line, would be B. Question D, bass clef. Here we have a note that sits above a ledger line, and the ledger line is above the staff. The note here on this ledger line is middle C in bass clef. So this note that we're working on would be one note higher than C. The answer would be D. Question E, treble clef. Here we have a note that sits below the second ledger line under the staff. This note here is middle C. So C, B, A, and this would be G. Question F, bass clef. Here we have a note that sits above the second ledger line, above the staff. This note here is middle C in the bass clef. So C, D, E, and this would be F. Question G, treble clef. This note here is A in treble clef. So A, B, C. Question G, bass clef. We can start with this note here, which is E in the bass clef. So from E going down, this is D. Going down, this would be C. Question I, treble clef. Here we're going to start with this note, which is middle C in treble clef. So we're going down from C, B, and this will be A. Question J, bass clef. Here we're going to start with this note, which is middle C in bass clef. So this note here would just be the note above C, which is D. Question K, treble clef. We're going to start with this note here, which is A in treble clef. So from here going up A, B, C, D. This will be D. Question L, bass clef. Here we're going to start with this note, which is middle C in bass clef. So C, D, this would be E. Exercise 2. Write the words spelled by the notes in these examples. Question A is done as an example. Here we have C, A, and B, which spells cap. Question B, bass clef. The first note is below the second ledger line below the staff. So we're going to start with this note, which is our reference. This is E in bass clef. So going down from E, this will be D, C, and so this will be B. So this is B. Second note is in the first space. Spaces are spelled all cows eat grass, so that's A. And the third note is on the first line, which is G. So the word is bag. Question C, bass clef. Here, the first note sits under the first line. If you remember the lines of the bass clef, the first line is G. The lines are spelled good balloons don't fly away. So this is a G. The note below it would be F. So we have F. The second note is in the first space, which is A. Now the third note, this one, is below one ledger line below the staff. So the note here would be E in bass clef, and this note would then be D. The fourth note is here, which is on the second ledger line above the staff. So we're going to start with this, which is middle C, and this will be D, and this will then be E. F-A-D-E will be fade. Question D, bass clef. The first note is on the ledger line above the staff. That will be middle C. Second note is on the top line, which is good balloons don't fly away. That's A. Third note is in the top space. All cows eat grass. That would be G. The last note here, which is again on the second ledger line above the staff. So C, D, E. C-A-G-E as cage. Question E, treble clef. The first note sits above a ledger line above the staff. So if we start with this note here, this is A in treble clef. So this will then be B because this is above A. Second note is in the top space. So F-A-C-E, that will be E. Third note is on the ledger line above the staff. That would be A in treble clef. The last note is sitting on top of the second ledger line above the staff. We're going to start with this note, which is A, B, C, D. So B-E-A-D, that's B. Question F, treble clef. The first note sits below a ledger line under the staff. So we're going to start with this note here, which is middle C. The first note would then be B because it's below C. The second note, we can also use middle C as a reference. So middle C is here. Below it will be B, and on the second line it will be A. So the second note is an A. Now I'm going to erase it first. Then the third note here is sitting below the first line. The first line is E, and so that note would be D. The fourth note is below the second ledger line under the staff. So again, we're going to start with C, going down to B. This will be A, and this is G. The last note is in the top space, F-A-C-E, it will be E. So we have B-A-D-G-E, which is batch. Exercise 3. Take the correct clef needed to make each of these named notes. Let's take a look at A together. Here, we're given this note that is on the second ledger line above the staff. And what we need to do is to decide whether we should put in a treble clef or a bass clef, so then this note will become an E. We can start with the treble clef. So if we put a treble clef here, then this note would be A, B, C. This will be C in treble clef, so it is not the correct answer. The answer will then be bass clef. Question B, we have this note here, and it needs to be F sharp. So let's try the treble clef. This note will be A in treble clef. This will be B, C, and D. This will then be D sharp, which is not F sharp. So the answer will be bass clef. Question C, we have this note here, which needs to be a G. Again, we're going to try treble clef first. We put in a treble clef here. This note will be C. This is B. Two lines would be A, and this will be G. So treble clef is correct. Question D, we have this note, which needs to be a D. So let's put in a treble clef here. And this would be A, B, C, and this will be D. So this is correct. Question E, here we have this note, which is C. So let's put in a treble clef. This note will then be middle C in the treble clef, so it's correct. Question F, we have this note, which is A. So let's put in the treble clef. And we're going to start with this note, which is middle C. This would be B. And so this note would be A. So treble clef is correct. Question G, we have this note here, and it's a D. Again, we're going to put in a treble clef. This note here would be A, and so this will be B if we are in treble clef. So the answer would be bass clef. Question H, we have this note, which is a B flat. We put in a treble clef. We are going to start with this note, which is middle C. This will be B. This is A. And so this would be G flat in treble clef. So the answer must be bass clef. Next, we will look at challenge together. Write each named note on the staff provided using ledger lines. You can choose any time value for your notes, which means you can choose semi-brief, minim, crotchet, or quaver. Number 1, we're given a treble clef, and the note is G sharp, so we need to find the G sharp that is on ledger lines. We can use this note, which is below the staff, as our reference point, which is middle C, and also this note, which is above the staff, as our reference, and that's A. Now G is just a note below A. However, this G is not on the ledger lines, so this is not the correct answer. I'm going to erase it, and I'm going to try to think of the G using the lower ledger line. If we start from the middle C, going down, this will be B, this note will be A, and so this would be G. It's a G sharp, so we're going to put a sharp in front of it. Number 2, we're given a treble clef, and this time they ask for D flat. So again, we can use this note, which is A, and this note, which is C, as our reference. If we start with middle C, going up one step, this will be D. But again, this D is not the one on the ledger lines, so I'm going to erase it. Let's start with the upper A. Starting from A, we go up, this will be B, then 2 ledger lines, this will be C, and so this note here, it will be D, and we need a flat because it's a D flat. When you add the ledger lines, remember the ledger lines are like extension of the staff. So if you are just going to put in one ledger line, for example, you cannot just put a ledger line up here like this, because you can see that this gap is too big, so it will cause confusion. The gap should be about the same as the gap between the lines on the staff like this. So if we are going to add one ledger line, it should be around here. Then if we add another ledger line, it will be about the same gap as well. So let's take a look at question 3 here. Here we have a bass clef, and they ask for F. So this time we're going to use this note here, which is middle C, as our reference, and this note here, which is E. Now if we start with the lower note E, go up one step, this will be F. But this F is not on the ledger line, so this is not the correct answer. So let's try with the upper C. Starting with C, going up, this would be D, this would be E, and so this note would be F. Question 4, we have a bass clef, and we are looking at B. So again, we're going to use this middle C as our reference, and also the lower E. This time we're going to start with the upper C, because if we go down one step from C, this will be B, but this is not the correct B. So we're going to erase this one. We'll start with the E below. So E falling down to D, this will be C, and so this note will be B. This is the end of our tutorial today. If you like my video, do subscribe to my channel so you're not going to miss any upcoming videos. See you next time.